I miss masturbating. Hello and welcome to the Planet 3 installation instructions video for the Rocky Mountain range of e-bikes. As always, it would be a good idea to start with the bike flipped upside down on a flat level surface. Also, it would be smart to put something underneath your handlebars to protect your iWalk controller on the left side. Also, it would be a good idea to shift the bicycle into the highest gear, meaning the smallest cog on the rear cassette, since that will ensure easier wheel removal and reinstallation. Next step is to remove the axle from the rear wheel. Now, depending on your axle type, you will take an appropriate socket wrench or an Allen key and insert it into the hole. If you have a quick release axle, just use your hand. Start unscrewing and keep doing that until it stops gaining distance. Then just simply pull it out. If you happen to have a SRAM derailleur on your bike, make your life easier by extending the cage forward and pressing this little lock button to hold it in place. If your derailleur doesn't have a lock button, simply push the cage forward with your thumb, pull the P-knuckle backwards, grab the rim by the top, and extract the wheel in an upwards motion. Depending on your bike model and year, it will come equipped with one of the following rear hub options. A 19mm completely round profile by DT Swiss. We love this one the most. And this is a 6-bolt hub. Another option on the mid-range models is the SRAM MTH746, which you can recognize by these flat wrench cutouts. The third option on the lower spec models is a center lock hub by Shimano. This can be either MT400 or an MT510. It doesn't really make a difference because the end cap profile is the same. You will start the Planet 3 installation process by removing the original magnet carrier from the hub. Take a Torx 25 bit or key and simply undo these two bolts. Now I will use a power tool for the sake of simplicity. Simply remove this from the hub, and it would be a good idea to store this in a Ziploc bag that the Planet 3 came in and have it with you in case something goes wrong with the Planet 3. For the most recent revision of the Planet 3, you will leave every other original bolt in one of the holes. It's very important that this bolt that you relocated from the other hole, you tighten with a torque wrench set to 6 or 7 Newton meters. Since the cycling industry at large likes to use too much grease at every point where it's not strictly necessary, if you have grease here on the end cap and in the dropout on the frame, I would like you to clean it up. Also, the top surface of the rotor has to be completely clean. I would suggest using a paper towel and some brake cleaner. Do not spray brake cleaner directly on the hub, just on the paper towel. And please clean this area up completely. If you see any thread locker or any other garbage on top of the rotor, please clean it up. Now you will insert 3 of the Planet 3 provided stainless steel bolts which have a different head profile into every other hole, which should be just empty on the rotor. You will tighten this down just until the point of contact, very gently, and stop immediately when the bolt head touches the surface of the rotor. Then you will again take your torque wrench set to 6 Newton meters and tighten down. Next, you will take your Planet 3 sun gear and press it on top of the bolt heads. These 3 holes have to go on top of the stainless steel bolt heads. You will notice underneath that the 3 other holes are made to incorporate the original bolt heads. Simply place it on top. Once all the holes are aligned, use 2 of your thumbs to press it down completely until you feel it bottom out on the rotor. There should be no gap between the top surface of the rotor and the bottom surface of the sun gear. Next, you will place your planets on the top surface of the sun gear. with the magnet face oriented towards you. Every Planet Tree for the Rocky Mountain will come equipped with a dual planet setup. The difference between a dual planet setup and a single planet setup is that a dual planet basically has half the ratio of a single planet, which means a lower assistance speed limit, specifically about 43 kilometers per hour instead of the 86 that a single planet has. However, on some Rocky Mountain bicycles, it was noticed by several users that when using a single planet configuration, they had a problem with low speed climbing. For example, if you were doing a technical climb in first or second gear, and then you had to ratchet your pedals, meaning you had to stop pedaling for a moment to avoid a rock or a root and striking it with your pedals, the bike would have a slight delay in the torque sensor activation, meaning that the power would not come on the instant that you started pedaling, but would be delayed by half a crank rotation. The dual planet configuration solves this problem, but it also gives you a slightly lower speed limit, although 43 kilometers per hour is usually enough for almost everyone. Feel free to test this for yourself because it seems to be dependent on the bike firmware version and nothing else. So test a single planet or test dual planets. If you are going with a dual planet setup right away, please make sure that the planets are completely opposite one another. They have to be in a 180-degree phase. So try to align them as best you can by a visual method so that when you're looking across the end cap, they are completely opposite one another. Next step is the installation of the Planet Tree ring gear, which is the external cover of the device. Now, this part is actually made out of two parts: the large surface of the ring gear and these clips, which are glued concentrically onto this part. So there is a super glued joint in between these two parts. That's why it is very important that when you place this on top of the hub end cap, that you only press centrally here on this raised bevel surface instead of pressing on the external edges of the ring gear, because this causes bending and puts this joint into tensile stress, while this simply provides compression, and even if it wasn't super glued, you could just push it down. Once you have your ring gear in place, you will use your thumbs to push down on this raised bevel surface and have half your thumb overlap the end cap and the other half on the raised bevel surface, something like this. And then you will use uniform pressure to get this started on the hub end cap. Once the frontal edge is seated, you can simply rotate this 180 degrees and then push the other side down. If your bike happens to have a SRAM MTH hub with the parallel wrench cutouts, these flats here, this will be the appropriate ring gear that I will send you. It has these two parallel surfaces which you have to align perfectly with the two flat wrench cutouts. So just pop it on like this, and from the top view just keep aligning until you get it perfectly parallel, and again just do the pressing centrally on the raised bevel surface. When it comes to proper installation depth of the ring gear for the SRAM MTH hub, if you have a SRAM centerline rotor, which is 1.85 millimeters thick at the 6-bolt interface, these little parallel surfaces are designed in such a way that you can just press this down completely and they will bottom out on the wrench flats before the ring gear would come in contact with the sun gear, ensuring perfect installation depth of the ring gear. However, if you're using a thicker rotor, such as Shimano XT or Hope floating rotors or any other rotor, then either use the feeler gauge or use the universal method to gauge the proper installation depth, which is when the horizontal edge of the ring gear is aligned with the lower horizontal edge of the sun gear. Once you have the ring gear started on the hub end cap, we need to push this down and engage the teeth of the ring gear on both sides with the planets. It's very important to install this to a proper installation depth. The proper installation depth is reached when this horizontal edge of the ring gear is overlapped with this horizontal edge of the sun gear. Once those two are completely parallel, there will be a 0.2 millimeter gap between the sun gear and the ring gear, both on the external set of teeth and the internal set of teeth.
Okay? There are two ways to ensure this happens. First way is a visual method, just by gauging this point as I just told you. The second one is to use a tool that I will send to you, which is a feeler gauge. This is 0.9 millimeters thick, and once you place it here parallel by the sun gear, once this edge again touches the feeler gauge, you will stop with the pushing, and that will ensure the correct gap inside. However, the visual method is both faster and more accurate. Also, this tool will not work if you have a Shimano rotor, because that one has an extruded spline which corresponds to the Planet 3 sun gear. So it does not have a flat upper surface of the rotor. Again, all the pressing, all the pushing needs to happen on this raised beveled edge of the clips that hold the ring gear in place. I would suggest just lowering your gaze to a perfectly horizontal position and just pressing uniformly down until you engage both the planets. Again, since this is a dual planet configuration, we need to engage the teeth of this planet with the teeth of the ring gear, and at the same time do it on the other side. What can happen is that both don't engage at the same time. If you just heard this audible click, this was when the teeth were slightly misaligned but still went in. Now it's important to push the other side down. As I try to push the other side down, it's not moving. This means that one of the teeth is not in perfect synchronization. What you can do is just a slight wiggle left and right, but this has to be like just a couple of degrees while still holding the pressure. Okay? And now that one has also engaged. Okay? Now I would like you to look at just one side of the device. It can be either this one or this one, but never look at the device centrally, because then you will have just a black background. And do all of the pushing on one side and then rotate. Okay? So I will just push here with my finger, and you can see that the edge is now perfectly overlapped and it's up in the air on the other side. But I will just rotate this now and just push again. And just do this in rotations of about 30 or 40 degrees. And that's it. You have reached the proper installation depth of the ring gear. Now it's important to verify that the planets underneath the ring gear are still in a perfect 180-degree phase. In case you have opted to use the feeler gauge, the procedure would be the same. You would lean the thinner tip of the feeler gauge against the sun gear, and then simply do all of the pressing again on this side until the ring gear makes contact with the feeler gauge, which sounds like this. But once the feeler gauge is removed, you can hear that the sound is different, okay? This means that the two parts are not in contact and you have a correctly installed ring gear. Once you have achieved the proper installation depth of the ring gear, you will take the two external position checking magnets that I've sent you, simply slide them apart and try to find the planets underneath. The magnets will snap to them. Just be careful with the orientation of the poles. And if you're a highly skilled professional like me, you have gotten this right on the first attempt, and they are exactly 180 degrees opposite. If that's the case, simply remove these position checking magnets and store them for later use. If the internal planets are not completely opposite one another, you need to redo this. Now, there are several ways to go about this. It all depends on your hub type. So, DT Swiss end caps are held by a single O-ring and they can go out pretty easily. So if you try to lift the ring gear, you see that it will just pop the end cap right with it. You can simply just try to take this off and then it will stop when it reaches the sun gear. So just take everything out, even the sun gear. You can do this by just lifting, okay? The planets will pop out. You can store them on the rotor since the rotor is magnetic. And now we need to get the ring gear off. The easiest way to do this is to just place it upside down on the rotor and then just push down, and be careful when you reach the bolts, okay? Maybe do this a little bit externally. Okay, and now just try to pull it off. Then reinstall the end cap, reinstall the sun gear in the proper orientation, make sure it's bottomed out. As we were pulling with the end cap, verify that the sun gear splines are perfectly set in place, because they are also a modular part, and then redo the installation. Try to gauge this correctly, pop the ring gear back on, push with uniform pressure all around until you feel both planets engage with a slight wiggle, and then reset your installation depth correctly. Again, take your magnets, slide them apart, and verify it's 180. Check just by doing a spin test, and don't forget to remove the external position checking magnets. The final step, where you can fuck up all of your previous efforts, is by placing the wheel in the bike. Simply extend the cage of the derailleur forward and aim the smallest cog in between the chain lines. However, the most important thing to note is to aim the disc in between the calipers and not hit the Planet 3 ring gear anywhere on the part of the frame or the sensor. Next, you will take your axle and simply pop it in. If you have a quick release, obviously use your hand. If not, take an appropriate Allen key or socket and just try to align the wheel so that the axle engages with the treads on the other side, and tighten this according to manufacturer's recommendation. This is usually 15 Newton meters. It would be a good idea to shift the bike into an easier gear before flipping it over. For this last test, I have disconnected the brake calipers from the bike and also the chain. So the only sound that you will hear when I spin the wheel is the Planet 3 in the dual configuration setup. If your bike has this level of sound, everything is functioning correctly. If you can hear something like this, then you have gone too deep on the installation depth of the ring gear, or there might be a material defect on your frame which might be pressing on some part of the ring gear. It's important to visually inspect from the rear and the top. If this is the level of sound, everything is fine, and you can go collect e-bike hate. People, please, now that you've gotten your happy ending, give me my happy ending. Please don't tell anyone, don't tell your friends. I'm getting like 30 emails a day. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to ride my bike. I haven't ridden my bike in like 3.5 weeks. I haven't even been to Pornhub in like a week and a half. I miss masturbating.